Hello everyone, and welcome to the first of two videos about my recent trip to Gisborne. I was down there on December 27 and 28 to film DSC 2759 with the Gisborne City Vintage Railway's excursion train. Of course, I also went for a ride down to Muriwai and back. Coincidentally, Mr. Muffin Trains was also in Gisborne on the same day as me, and I've left a link to Sam's video in the description of this one. But before we got anywhere near Opotiki, let alone Gisborne itself, I ended up seeing two freight trains round my neck of the woods before venturing off into the unknown. In other words, the section of State Highway 2 south of Opotiki. First up is DL 9106 crossing Maxwell's Road in Tauranga with train MH1. At the time of uploading, there is a huge block of line closure in Auckland, but trains are still running between Hamilton and Tauranga. Not entirely sure why this lot came to a stop, twice. Usually the container trains don't stop when they're going through this crossing. And on the way down to Gisborne, but still very close to home, I stopped in Rangiuru to get DL 9452 passing by with train C74 from KiwiRail. This is pretty much the same spot where I saw a JA 1275 on the Pacific Coast steamer excursion back in June 2007. In my opinion, one of the most boring roads in the North Island is the Opotiki to Gisborne section of State Highway 2, but despite feeling that like it took a toad's age to get down SH2, we still made it to Gisborne just after midday, and got to the station in time to see DSC 2759 bring the coaches into the platform. The Gisborne City Vintage Railway runs their excursion train from Gisborne to Muriwai, using either their WA class tank engine or the DSC diesel shunter. More on the WA later. Gisborne was served by KiwiRail freight trains up until 2012, when nasty storms washed away some of the track between Muriwai and Napier. The line has since been rebuilt and reopened as far as Wairoa, but the GCVR's excursion is now the only semi-regular rail activity up at the northern end of the line. Prior to the washouts, this train was able to run as far south as Beach Loop, but these days it can only go as far as Muriwai. Here we see DSC 2759 bringing the coaches into the platform at Gisborne Station. This particular locomotive was built by NZR's Addington Workshops in 1967, and was initially preserved at Mainline Steam's Plimmerton depot before being sold to the GCVR in August 2020. Notably, there are 3 rebuilt FM guards vans in this train, along with one conventional 56-foot coach and a wagon with FM modules plus a big water tank. The railway volunteers told me that this was extra water capacity for the WA, though I'm not sure why they left it in the consist when the DSC was running. Before we left for Muriwai, I had a bit of a close-up look at the DSC, as well as getting to sit in the cab. These locomotives have 2 separate control stands, one for each direction of travel. Seeing 2759 reminded me of the 2 DSCs that are preserved in Waitara, specifically 2584 back when she was working. More recently, they have since added 2257 to the fleet. And here we are, getting on board the rebuilt FM9. First thing I noticed was the basic buffet counter, followed by the seats that looked like they were either nicked from an old bus or one of Auckland's old SA or SX coaches.
Which a lot of places, it's a bad matter of positioning.
Precisely at 1300 hours, or 1 PM, DSC 2759 got underway from Gisborne on a run to Muriwai. Here we see her crossing Grey Street just outside the station.
anyone's attention, just talk to one of these people. Once the passenger count has been completed, you are permitted to travel through the train, make the most of the scenery and photo opportunities if you like. We have 2 toilets situated on the train. The first is in the front of the second carriage, and the second is in the very last carriage at the back of the train. So we do have a buffet, so if you'd like to get your drinks or snacks, that is in the third carriage from the front, so please feel free to do that. We also have a festive raffle running at the moment if you would like to support us as well. So we hope you enjoy your journey with us, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thank you.
We're going to get to the road there for any box, obviously.
Oh my gosh.
As we were making our way out of the city, I decided to go for a wander through the train. It was pretty busy on this occasion, which is a good sign as far as I'm concerned that the railway is still popular with tourists and locals. Unfortunately, the 56-foot coach didn't feel like it was air conditioned, but the rebuilt FM vans almost certainly were.
The other woman goes.
We'll soon be approaching the airport runway, and if anyone would like to be on the platforms outside to take photos, we do actually go over the runway.
Yay.
In my opinion, the most bizarre aspect of this journey, by far, was the crossing of the Gisborne Airport runway. This is the only example of such an arrangement anywhere in the Southern Hemisphere. Further down the line, we passed one of the most expensive drones I've ever seen. Then there were these 2 Class 37s sitting in a field next to the line. And here we're crossing the Waipāoa River on a bridge that was heavily damaged by Cyclone Bowler back in 1988, but was quickly rebuilt to keep the line open, and because NZR still had a lot of rolling stock trapped in Gisborne. These days there is a 10 km/h speed restriction on the bridge. Just under 40 minutes after leaving Gisborne, we arrive at the current end of the line in Muriwai. As stated previously, the excursion used to run all the way down to Beach Loop, but this is as far south as they can currently go. At this spot, the passengers can all get out and either have a rest, leg stretch or some form of picnic. Meanwhile, the DSC sat idle for several minutes before running round the train for the return trip. As for me, I was hanging around by the locomotive most of the time and trying to get as many pictures as possible. In some cases, this proved difficult because of how often other passengers got in the way. Despite not being owned by Mainline Steam anymore, DSC 2759 still displays clear evidence of her former owner. As an aside, I've never really liked how DSC's looked with white stripes. Wasp stripes. Especially since I'm so used to seeing a plain yellow end on these locomotives. On the way back to Gisborne, I decided to record the runway crossing again. If my research is correct, Air New Zealand still serves this airport with flights to Auckland or Wellington. And at 15:10 hours, or 3:10 PM, we see DSC 2759 arriving back at Gisborne Station. After all the passengers got off, the locomotive pulled forward and began shunting the coaches back into the shed. I was impressed to see that the GCVR still has enough shed space for nearly their entire fleet, although that's not saying much since they've only got 3 locomotives, 4 coaches, and at least 4 wagons. This little red thing is TR23, and I'll explain more about her a little later on. TR-23 was built by the Drury Car Company of England in 1939, and is one of only 2 surviving examples of the strange 060 TR variant. The vast majority of these TR shunting tractors were 040s, and I'm not sure why they ever built an 060 version. As for the other 060 TR that is still around today, she is now displayed at a school playground in Thames, of all places. Of course, no visit to Gisborne is complete without having a look at steam locomotive WA165, even if she isn't running. WA165 is perhaps the most iconic part of the Gisborne City Vintage Railway, and certainly the only steam locomotive based in this city. She was built by NZR's own Hillside Workshops of Dunedin back in 1897, which makes her an impressive 124 years old as of 2021. Technically, she's a prairie since her wheel arrangement is 262. Although WA165 is now a sole survivor, that wasn't always the case. Prior to 1971, another WA was also in preservation. This was WA68, and she used to be on static display in Napier, but she had to be scrapped in the early 1970s due to deterioration from the salty air. Napier is right by the sea after all. Back to WA165 again. One of the volunteers told me that this locomotive now has a welded boiler, with her original riveted boiler displayed outside the shed. And here is DSC 2759 shunting the water carrying wagon back into the shed, and right in front of the WA. This was the last footage I captured before heading off to the hotel.
This module's only been on here for the last 2 or 3 years.
I was left with very mixed thoughts about the city of Gisborne. On the one hand, it's great to see the excursion trains still running and crossing a runway, of all things, but it's still sad to see so much disused railway infrastructure in the city. Frankly, I'm amazed that the crossing bells and incandescent lights still work. When the GCVR's train isn't out and running, the main yard almost looks completely abandoned, especially since the Society has enough shed space for just about all of their rolling stock. The line does continue a little further past the station, but the track doesn't actually go into the port itself anymore. We'll see more of that section of track in the next video. Speaking of future videos, stay tuned for my coverage on WW480 at the Glenbrook Vintage Railway. Incidentally, before I even went on this Gisborne trip, I would often get Gisborne and Glenbrook confused with each other.